Hello everyone. Today I'm going to give a short presentation on the history of USA. History of USA. History of USA began in 1750 in North America. It's been 150 years since settlers from Western Europe, mostly feeding poverty, famine, or religious and political persecution first arrived on the continent. Their arrival came at the expense of millions of Native Americans who lived there for thousands of years, mostly in tribes. On the east coast, Great Britain has established colonies inhabited by 1.5 million people. The northern regions depend mainly on fishing and trade, while in the south the climate is ideal for growing products such as tobacco, rice, and cotton. Rich landlord called the planters size vast territories that uh, they exploit by buying slaves from Africa, namely the triangular trade. Further west, the Appalachian Mountains form a natural boundary. Beyond it is the vast French colony, which lives mainly off the fur trade. The 7 Years' War. Tension rise between the British colony, and when the 7 Years' War breaks out in Europe, Britain dominates and takes hold of New France. Native American tribes living there unite to demand the departure of the British and the recognition of their own state. To calm the situation, a British government hurriedly carves out an Indian reservation between the Appalachians, 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 the Mississippi River, and the Great Lakes. This does not please the colonists who wanted to seize the opportunity to extend their territories to the west. But in addition, war proves costly for Britain. The country expects its colonies to repay parts of its debts through new taxes, which further injures the settlers. In Boston, in protest of taxes on tea colonies disguised as Native Americans' claims on the board, British India Company, British East India Company ships and throw out its tea cargo into the ocean. With the situation tense, representatives from 12 colonies gather in Philadelphia to organize the First Continental Congress. They decided to boycott British goods. The following year, the War of Independence broke out, pitting the insurgents, also called the Patriots, against the British and its loyalties. Now, on July 4, 1776, the Second Continental Congress proclaims the independence of the United States of America. France sees an opportunity to avenge its defeat in the Seven Years' War. Having invested heavily in its military fleet, the country has the means to compete with the Royal Navy. France allies with the Patriots, Spain and the United Province of the Netherlands in turn go to war against the Great Britain. In 1783, the Patriots prevail, forcing Britain to recognize the independence of the country. The United States receives territories sorry the United States receives territories until Mississippi, while Spain seizes Florida, the United States of America now. This marks the first time as a European colony gains independence. The United States adopts a constitution based on a strict separation of powers. The legislative power formed by Congress passes laws and budgets. The judiciary, with the Supreme Court, upholds the Constitution. And finally, there is the executive power with the US President and the head of government. On the other hand, the 13 states retain sovereignty with their own constitution and the governor. It was decided to build the new capital, Washington, along with the Potomac River. In the West, each new territory with at least 60,000 free citizens would be allowed to form a new state equal to others. Pioneers set off to recollect their pushing back Amerindian tribes further west of the Mississippi River. Now the conquest of the West. In 1800, France obtained Louisiana from Spain in exchange of the kingdom of Etruria, Etruria, but it proves difficult to protect this vast, far away and relatively less known territory. Fearing the loss of Louisiana to the United Kingdom in war, France decided to sell the religion of the United States Congress then funds expeditions to explore and reach the Pacific Ocean. In Europe, France and the UK clash again. The United States first tries to remain neutral, but flowing tensions with Britain enters the war. It fails in a bid to invade the colony of Canada as a British maritime raid reaches Washington and burns the city. At the end of the war, the United States abandons its ambitions in the north and focuses on the south, where the Spanish Empire, a military incursion in Florida allows, after negotiations, the annexations of the territory. And in the west, Oregon is shared with the United Kingdom. East of Mississippi, 5 Amerindian tribes are adapted to the settlers' sedentary and agrarian lifestyle, but Congress nevertheless decided to take over the land and pushes the natives to reserve west of the Mississippi. Thousands died of execution on the way. In Mexico, Texas, which is populated mainly by settlers from the United States, declared its dependence after a war. The Republic of Texas is created and in 1845 is annexed to the United States. But as the border is poorly defined, both countries are at war. The United States prevails and takes the opportunity to annex New Mexico and California. When the discovery of the gold causes a rush that attacks hundreds of thousands of pioneers of all origins, with the land route proving dangerous, private funds are invested in the construction of a railway in Panama. The state of California is admitted, which does not have slavery. Southern states are largely Arisian and have slavery, while northern states are industrial and abolitionist. Both sides wish to extend their model to the new western states, causing the gap between them to median. Sorry. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln, who is hostile to slavery, is elected as the president of the country. In response, southern states ceded from the United States one by one and band together to proclaim the Confederate States of America. Then begins the Civil War, which pits the Unionists of the North against the Confederates of the South. And the North sets up a maritime blockade on the Atlantic coast, cutting out any export support from the Europe and blocking cotton exports. In 1865, the North prevails and takes the opportunity to impose its policies. Slavery is abolished and 3.5 million slaves are freed. But African Americans are now victims of segregation and racism, especially through the emergence of Ku Klux Klan, a white supremacist organization. Many migrate to the north while others move to the cities. The Russian Empire fears losing Alaska to Britain, so chooses to sell the territory to the United States. To accelerate its conquest of the West, the government finances the construction of transcontinental. In the center of the country, the invention of new machinery allows intensive agriculture. Vast plantations of wheat, corn, and large pastures are set up at the expense of the last 250,000 Amerindians who are kept on reserves. On the other hand, the rich soil allows rapid development of industry. The old continent Europe now views the United States as an EI Dorado. Feeling poverty and religious persecution, many southern and eastern Europe's migrate to the United States where they work as cheap labor. But the economic boom only benefits a minority, and an elite group of industrialists grow rich quickly by establishing monopolies in sectors such as steel, railways, oil, and banks at the expense of workers and peasants, including women and children working in harassed conditions. Strikes and protests erupt demanding better conditions, but these are often met with violence. By private militias or national guard, while European powers colonize a large part of the world, the United States also looks to project its power on the international scene. While annexing Hawaii in the middle of the Pacific, the country turns to Cuba, where there is a revolt against the Spanish. The United States supports Cuban independence after the mysterious explosion of a U.S. Navy ships in the port of Havana. War breaks out between Spain and the United States. The United States wins obtain the independence of Cuba and seizes Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. The country thus became a colonial power. In Colombia, a French company began construction of a canal that would connect to the ocean, greatly shortening the journey between the US East and West Coast. The United States buy the project and then intervenes to support the independence of Panama. In return, the new government of Panama offers the United States a strip of land which will help to complete the construction of the canal inaugurated in 1914. Now World War First. In Europe, World War First began with workers and peasants on the front lines. Industry on the continent slowed down. The US industry takes advantage of this, and despite the country's neutrality in the war, sells on credit ammunition, food, clothes, and automobiles to the entity countries. In responsible, Germany tries to impose a maritime blockade by shrinking merchant ships in British waters. In 1917, a German telegram destined for Mexico is intercepted proposing a military alliance against the United States. This publishes the United States to go to war on the side of the entity, and 2 million soldiers are sent to European fronts. 116,000 soldiers lose their lives. After the victory of the entity, Europe finds itself indebted to the United States. Now, interwarfare, the economy of the US prospers. In factories, improvements in the assembly line cause production to skyrocket and decrease prices. The rise in purchasing power and credit results in a boom for the sale of cars, all kinds of appliances and bank shares. Hollywood became a major industry with global influence. Thanks to the sale of radios, music genres such as jazz become popular in New York. Mainly nightclubs open, stimulating the sale of alcohol. The more conserv the more conservative government tries to stem the phenomenon by voting for prohibition, forbidding the production, transport, or sale of alcohol. In response, thousands of speakeasies spring up throughout the country. Mafia networks size the market and get rich quickly. Meanwhile, the South misses out on this wave of prosperity. A falling price of agricultural products plunged the region into poverty. The Ku Klux, the Ku Klux Klan comes back into prominence, this time also targeting Catholics, Jews, and immigrants in addition to the African Americans. The organization reaches 5 million members and is then banned after several linking episodes. In 1929, the Wall Street stock market crash takes place. The US economy collapses. In a few short years, a string of bankruptcies of companies and banks pushed a quarter of the active population into unemployment. Prohibition is lifted and steps are taken to try to revive the economy and improve working conditions. Then after in World War II, in Europe, World War II break out. The United States, although officially neutral, prepares for war by reinstating military services. In addition, the country sells arms mainly to the United Kingdom and the USSR. In the Pacific Ocean, in order to curb the expansion of imperialist Japan allied to Nazi Germany, the United States imposes upon the country an embargo on steel and oil. In response, Japan launches a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, causing the United States to enter the war. The country secretly embarks upon a research program to create the atomic bomb. In 1945, the Allies overcome Germany. The USSR and the United States then unite against Japan. A ground invasion by the Soviets and the two atomic bombs dropped by the United States on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki forced Japan to surrender. At the end of war, the United States supports the creation of the United Nations, whose primary role is to maintain peace and security in the world. Europe finds itself in ruins and is exhausted by the war. The United States and the USSR emerge as the two great world powers. Now, in the Cold War situation, after the World War II, the USSR and the United States try and peddle their influence in Europe. The United States implements the Marshall Plan while the Soviet Union supports pro-communist governments in Eastern countries. The old continent is found divided by the Iron Curtain. The USSR and the United States engage in a Cold War that is an arms race without direct confrontation. The US largely spared the ravages of war on its territory, has an industrial, economic, and military advantage. Inside the country, federal officials sympathetic to communist idea are dismissed. Hollywood is also used to churn out an anti-communist parties. On the global arena, the country employs an inventionist policy aimed at stemming at all cost the spread of communism. The US intervenes in Greece, China, and engages its military in Korea and Vietnam. The Soviet Union, for its part, invests heavily to catch up with the US. After developing atomic weapons of its own, it became the first country to send a satellite into orbit and further outside itself by sending the first man into space. The United States then launches the Apollo program, which aims to send the first astronaut to the moon. In Cuba, an attempt to overthrow the new communist government fails. The Soviet Union takes advantage to um, with the country and installs nuclear missiles on its territory pointed at the United States. Tensions built a point where it seems a third world war was imminent. However, an accord is reached between two world powers, resulting the USSR withdrawing from Cuba. Now, about the civil rights now. Within the country, more and more civil rights movement gain momentum, forcing the government to review its social policies. African Americans began non-violent actions to combat segregations. More and more women enter the workforce and demand equal pay. Native Americans also fight for better conditions. And moreover, with the US at war in Vietnam, students are happy pacifist movements call for peace. In 1969, the country sends the first man to the moon. Worldwide, Millions of viewers watched the event live on their televisions. Now, about international politics. On the global area, the United States tries to ease tensions. It begins diplomatic rapprochement with China and signs agreement with the USSR to limit the global arms race. In the Middle East, the US supports Israel in the Yom Kippur War, for which it is then subject to an oil embargo imposed by OPEC countries. In Vietnam, after negotiations, the United States withdraws their army. 2 years later, the communists prevail in the country, tarnishing the image of United States. The USSR takes this opportunity to intensify its international policy. The country occupies Afghanistan, and in reaction, the United States provide military support to the Mujahideen. In Central America, US also intervenes in Nicaragua and Guatemala to counter communist revolutions. And Iran, after a revolution, became an Islamic republic that goes against US policy. The latter strengthens its military presence in the Middle East to ensure the security of oil supply. On the Soviet side, the USSR struggles to contain the revolutions in Eastern Europe. With its economy in tatters despite attempts at reform in 1991, the USSR collapses, marking the end of the Cold War. Now, after the New World War order, the United States emerges as the only major world power. Domestically, the population calls for more investment in the fight against poverty, crime, gangs, and drugs. However, the US continues to primarily focus on its foreign policy, showing an apparent willingness to become the world's policeman of sorts. When Iraq invades Kuwait, which then held 9% of the known oil reserve in the world, the United States forms a coalition and neutralizes the Iraq army. The US then establishes a list of countries considered as rogue and threatening global peace and stability, and these nations are subjected to blockades and embargoes. Meanwhile, the military presence of an ally, sorry, embargoes. Meanwhile, the military presence of an ally of Israel in the Middle East brothers racial Islamists, including the terrorist group AI, Qaeda, headquartered by Osama bin Laden, who is formerly from the Afghan War. US facilitates and assists around the world are targeted by terrorist attacks. After the War on Terror on September 11, 2001, the United States became the victim of large-scale terrorist attack on its territory. Terrorist, Terrorism thus becomes the new enemy of the country. But it proves more difficult to fight this war as terrorist organizations operate discreetly. In mobiles network without borders, having launched a war against the Taliban in Afghanistan, the US hardens its stance against North Korea, Iran, and Iraq, which it considers part of an axis of evil. A new war is launched against Iraq, but US troops after quickly overthrowing the government and find themselves fighting against several terrorist groups in the region. In 2007, subprime mortgage shocked, followed by the financial crisis, plunges the global economy into turmoil. The country tries to revive its economy, among other measures, by boosting the extraction of shale oil on its territory. Today, the invention or inventionist policy of the country is increasingly countered by rising powers such as Russia and China. The United States, however, remain the most powerful economy and military in the world. And finally, thank you for listening.